out. He was not politically weakened at all. He was politically strengthened.
To speak to you tonight about our economic recovery program and why I believe it's essential that the Congress approve this package.
The sympathy for Reagan,
that's the key,
was so great.
And he used that. He was very clever. He used it, and they went right to work, and next thing you know, they had given him all the stuff he wanted.
Thanks to some very fine people, my health is much improved. I'd like to be able to say that with regard to the health of the economy.
There was a strategy. Less regulation, lower tax rates, get inflation under control. If you do those things, you may have a short-term problem, but in the longer term, you'll have a strategy that works.
People forget the fact that when we came into power, the top marginal tax rate was 70%.
It's time to create new jobs, to build and rebuild industry, and to give the American people room to do what they do best.
Reaganomics was the essence of the first term.
The easy part of it is, let the market be free, let the people who own the businesses do whatever they want, cut their taxes, give them incentives to produce more. Now the problem is that generally speaking, when you cut taxes really dramatically, obviously the amount of money going into federal coffers is reduced. Therefore, the federal government has to either cut spending or they're going to run a huge deficit. Well, the Reagan people came up with the theory that you could cut taxes and this would goose the economy so much that you could actually increase proceeds at the same time. And it would all work out. George Bush famously called it voodoo economics.
Voodoo economics. And that's how candidate George Bush described candidate Ronald Reagan's policy during the 1980 presidential primaries.
What I'm saying is that this type of what I call a voodoo economic policy, it just isn't going to work.
Last night, Vice President Bush was asked about that and corrected the record.
Well, what I said back then, it's very hard to find. Actually, let me start over. One, I didn't say it. Nobody, every network's looked for it, and none can find it. It was never said.
There was a fundamental falsehood at the core of Reaganomics.
This was the famous Laffer curve proposed by economist Arthur Laffer.
Reaganomics literally is, as far as I'm concerned, it is the provision of incentives to the marketplace to allow the economy to perform its functions properly.
Dr. Laffer, would you draw your curve for me and explain how it works?
Sure. In a very simple sense, if you tax people who work and you pay people who don't work, don't be surprised if you find a lot of people not working. Hello? Is that so complicated?
The Laffer curve was presented as an intellectual support for the idea that reducing taxes would produce more revenues.
I mean, if you tax rich people and give the money to poor people, you're going to have lots and lots of poor people and no rich people.
And that was, I think, considered by most people a pretty extreme interpretation of what would happen.
Ronald Reagan gave us a prototype. Low taxes, less regulation, limited spending. That's the model.
He created an economic miracle.
It's clear that recovery is strengthening and spreading throughout the economy. And as Al Jolson would have said, you ain't seen nothing yet.
You cannot be fair in your historical evaluation of Ronald Reagan if you don't look at the terrible damage his economic policies did to this country.
Many people say that Ronald Reagan made America strong again, that America had been greatly weakened in the 1960s and in the 1970s, and Reagan helped to rebuild American prestige, its economic power, and then put it back on the path to growth. But the real benefits, and also the tremendous costs, really only became clear more recently.
The essence of Reaganomics was a massive transfer of wealth towards the rich and away from the poor. The Reagan administration, by cutting taxes overwhelmingly for the wealthiest and the corporations, set in motion arguably the single greatest government-led transfer of wealth in history and in the direction of the top 2% of the country.
Ronald Reagan did cut taxes, and of course the US began to have a series of dangerous and increasing budget deficits.
This week, America became a debtor nation for the first time since the First World War.